There is still, I suspect, a very high proportion of higher education assessments that are summative essays. How do we perhaps end the reliance on the essay being the summative assessment tool of choice?
This all comes back to that theme of assessment literacy. It's about giving educators the permission and also the confidence to try other forms of assessment. But there's also a cycle we have to break with students too. It's what they're used to. In school, and this is a global context here I'm talking about, if you look at what happens at school leaving age, the majority of students sit examinations in a big exam hall over a period of hours, and they write as much as they can in that space of that 2 or 3 hours. So they are almost expecting the same when they come to university. And if we do something different, it's difficult for them as well. So it's about helping everybody to try and see that there is not just one way of doing this. There are multiple ways that we can do this. And some ways are actually more effective than others. And it may be that that essay is the right thing in that context, but not always and not for everything. So it's helping people to see that there are just different ways to do this.
In your view, over maybe the next 5 or 10 years, who or what will most influence the evolution of assessment?
I think we come back to artificial intelligence here. I think going forward, what we already know about how that can help us mark, how it can help us assess, how it can help us pick out information, pick out detail in assessments. I think there's so much more there that will be developed. We're learning all the time. It's developing very, very fast. And I think the sophistication will be there in the next few years to actually give us some really, really interesting AI-led ideas about what a good piece of work might look like, about what this grade might look like. It won't stop people from being involved. I'm not talking about the rise of the machines here taking over everybody. I'm talking about us working alongside this technology. And we see, what it can bring and how it can improve things. It has a potentially great democratizing benefit in that it could open up testing into people's homes, onto a mobile phone, giving you accessibility no matter where you are in the world. It could mitigate against people who are in very impoverished communities, countries, not being able to access educational tools or assessments. There are lots and lots of potential benefits here socially and politically and in many ways. So I think this is what's going to be of most interest going forward.
What potential role do you see in artificial intelligence helping educators create questions or perhaps even grade answers from students?
Well, the technology is already here and it's been in use for about a decade now of AI technology that helps grade questions and answer questions. At the moment, the potential is not necessarily there in terms of artificial intelligence asking questions in the way that we might see in a traditional way of assessing someone or being responsive to a candidate in terms of, say, an answer they've already given, an AI algorithm then trying to create a follow-up question. We're not quite at that point yet, but we certainly are there in terms of the potential of AI being able to mark and grade effectively, quickly, and actually more accurately than human beings quite often. And again, I come back to an example that I always use in medicine now. We know that there is AI technology in medicine that can more accurately diagnose certain illnesses. And in the assessment world, we've been looking at those kind of models and statistical models and looking at how do we apply them in the human context for learning. So, I think it is interesting that often, and this is an important point, people confuse computer-based assessments with artificial intelligence used in computer-based assessments. So the AI component can be there and it can be used to mark and it can be used to award and create grades and outcomes. But that's its main context at the moment. And I think the important potential is, to be fair, there's a lot of marking that's incredibly boring.
Yes.
I have yet to meet an educator that finds marking interesting. People often imagine that I relish the prospect of marking loads of scripts. Of course I don't. It's a very difficult task, and it's quite a laborious task. And if you could use the technology to do that, that would be wonderful. So I think going forward, that's what we are looking at.
The one thing I don't miss from being an educator is marking. Miss many other parts of it, but definitely not the marking. A follow-up on that, though, is human beings are involved in this process. To what extent do you think students are ready to accept, beyond maybe AI marking something that's seen as relatively simple, maybe a couple of words that they've written, versus marking an entire paragraph or an entire essay or an entire piece of coursework? Will students, or how might students accept that it's been done by AI without any human intervention? I think there's a difference perhaps where a human has been assisted, but where AI has done all of it, will we see students perhaps suggesting that they want a second mark from a human?
I think that's the really difficult crux of this issue at the moment, is the trust issue in AI technology. And I think particularly in England, one of the things we've suffered from is what happened in 2020 with the grading and the grade awarding for A-levels and GCSEs. Now, there's a lot of reparations to be done there, because politicians were quoted as talking about mutant algorithms used in the awarding process, which suggested to a lot of the public that some kind of artificial intelligence was involved. And it wasn't. There's no AI used in that kind of a grading system. It's simply a statistical model designed by a human being. And of course, they have flaws in them. And that's what went wrong. And there were other reasons why those grades were wrong that summer. But I think really how we use AI in the classroom, how we think about it in the processes of assessment going forward are, I don't know if I can imagine a time where it completely runs the show in terms of marking. I think we would always need human beings to come in and make certain judgments. And also we're looking at a breadth of things, subject content, knowledge, competency, skills, all sorts of things across all sorts of areas. I'm trying to imagine now how you might construct an AI model, say, to mark a piece of dance or composition in music or whatever it might be, as you say. I think there's a long way to go in terms of how we educate people in what AI is and what its capabilities are.
Assuming that a student is permitted to use artificial intelligence in their assessment, something like ChatGPT or all the other forms of AI that exist, how might you suggest educators properly allow them to do so?
Well, we're at the very early stages of looking at this at the moment. And of course, these kinds of AI models have their limitations. And I think the important thing is that we have open conversations with students about this. And we talk to them about how that technology might assist them in developing an idea. But the difference between looking at how a piece of AI constructs an answer to a question and then you, as a human being, providing a critical response to that question are quite different things. So in a way, the only thing I can compare it to is a bit like if you have a rough question or a rough idea of something you want to ask and you don't really know about the subject. Most of us would either Google it, have a look on Wikipedia, see what we can get. And the important thing, academically speaking, is that's not where it ends. That's just where it starts. So one of the things I will be experimenting with my students is getting them to look at examples from AI chatbots, look at answers, look at what's good about the way that those things are written, what can they identify in them that's academically useful or not, and then look at how they could improve upon that answer. What would they do? How would they construct an answer? I think the important thing is that we don't just ignore it and pretend it's not happening. I think the more you bring it into the classroom, the more you're giving that message that we know this stuff is out there and here's a way you can use it that could be potentially useful or potentially educative. Rather than, which it feels at the moment that there's a kind of building and rising panic around this could destroy the craft of essay writing, this could destroy teaching and learning. I don't think that's true. I think that's quite a knee-jerk response that we're having at the moment. And I think as educators, we need to look at this just a bit more carefully and again, a bit more creatively.